Just to catch everyone up, just in a nutshell, if you didn't listen to our last two episodes, we've been talking a lot about positive intelligence and the saboteurs. So if you haven't, you go to positiveintelligence.com, you can take a saboteur assessment. And what it does is it feeds back what are your saboteurs or your inner critic or your gremlin, however you want to call that out. Really good assessment. And then last time we were together, we talked about the sage powers, which are just basically those things that can help us to quiet our saboteurs. And the sage powers aren't anything necessarily magical. They're things that we all have within us, and they are empathy, exploration, innovation, navigation, and decisive action. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, listen to our last couple of episodes. Today, we thought that Karen and I while we were talking and preparing for our conversation too, we were like, oh yeah, I think we need Scott to be like our first guest on our show. So, Scott, I mentioned this to you earlier, but I'd just like to maybe jump in. So Scott has recently published a book called Culture is an Inside Job. And he is doing a lot of speaking about it, and it's an amazing book. And he also has a, pretty big change in his, I guess, what do you want to call it? Like your career, your just, where you're at now and moving forward. So Scott was a CEO of McGohan Brabender for many years, and he's now transitioning into a different role with them and just in his life in general. So I'm just going to pause and Scott, maybe tell us a little bit, give your update about where you are right now in your life and career, and then how all this relates to what we've been talking about tied to your book around levels of leadership and our saboteurs that get in the way. So I'll just have you jump in and then we'll just see where this goes.
That's a mouthful.
Yes, it
Thank you.
is.
Yeah, let me go back to when we started to plan a transition timeline. Might have been I'll probably say 6 or 7 years ago. So, who's ready? Who's on the board? Who needs coached? Um, who needs to sit in the room with different people? Just kind of walking through what does transition look like for McGohan Brabender. And I've been involved like you, Wendy, at Aileron, and I've been in a lot of companies, and I've seen a lot of transitions go really well, and I've seen more end badly.
Mm-hmm.
And a leader's, number one job is to begin to think about what's next for the organization, and that means normally replacing yourself. And who's ready for that? And emotionally, I mean, strategically, it's really important. Emotionally, it's even harder
Mm-hmm.
because for a lot of us, and maybe even sadly more for me, our identity is in our careers, and it's where we get affirmed. It's where we get maybe immediate affirmation versus long-term affirmation, and then and it's where we get relevance. It's where we get applause, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes people they applaud because they have to, not because they want to. But anyway, either way,
Well, and
there's a
this is where you have all, that's where you put your value too.
yeah.
Your
There's just
personal value has been tied up into that particular role and all that you were responsible for.
and I was a massive workaholic for I would probably say for the majority of my career. And on the end of my career, by the grace of God, I started to wake up a little bit. Self awareness came, uh, self worth began to show up. So that journey on the transition was interesting. And if I could give anybody advice on that, is you've got to give yourself a lot of time to accept it. I mean, you can think you're being a hero and you can think you're doing a great thing for the company by saying, hey, I'm ready to leave and we're going to build on this transition. But if you're really not ready to do that, I just think that ends badly for a lot of people, for yourself, for your family, for everyone around you. So just spend a lot of time accepting and just the honest truth around what that looks like, for you. Sadly, if I went back, I don't know, 20 years ago and I wanted to step away, I wouldn't have had anything else to do because that's all I did. And sadly, it's all I cared about.
Yeah.
So to kind of walk through and accept the fact that um, I did my very best, and sometimes it didn't end very, very well, but I did a really good job. I feel proud about carrying McGohan Brabender through the Affordable Care Act, and you remember that, Wendy, and
Yeah.
the retooling of the company, and we had really low growth, and how are we going to make it? Then evolving through COVID, which was very challenging emotionally, spiritually, for not only our leadership team but the entire workforce. And then selling the organization to our employees through an ESOP was probably one of the greatest days in my career. And then finding the two leaders that are ready to go is a real blessing. And if you're a leader and you have someone that's ready to do that, and you don't let them like take that chair soon enough, they might leave your company and go lead somewhere else. And then when you're ready, like you've got double the problem. Now you got to go find somebody else, and that gets super wonky. But both Mike and I, we felt like he was going to stay a year, I was going to stay a year and a half, and we were going to transition, and we were going to coach and mentor and all this stuff. And yeah, that probably happened for about maybe 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
But like after 90 days, they just took the reins. They didn't leave us behind because not because they didn't care. They two things. Number one, Mike and I got out of the way. So out of respect for them and out of respect for my dad, who we watched step away, who gave us control and authority and trust and affirmation and all of that, they took off running, and they're doing a great job.
To
So
your point, you said it earlier, they were ready,
they were
right?
ready.
And you paid attention to that. And so, and you allowed to, you had that trust level and they had the trust in you. And so that's probably why it took off so fast, right?
Yeah, and I think for some people, it'd say, "Well, how do you know they're ready?" Which is a really good question. Maybe just briefly, um, uh, for somebody that's exploring this, would be my dad used to give us some decisions to make,
Hmm.
and then every once in a one time I asked him like, these are really tiny decisions, and like I want a big one. And he goes, actually, I'm giving you some little ones. And I go, why? And he goes, because I don't care what decision you make. I go, what? He goes, I don't care what decision you make. I'm more curious in regards to how you make them and how you treat people inside of those decisions. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, whoa, okay. And that made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. The
And
how.
that's all about culture,
That's the
is
culture piece. Yeah, right there.
how you're going to move, workforce, how you're going to move yourself, how you're going to inspire people, and all of those things too. And so Mike and I spent so much time with Mike and with Eric and Beth, and we knew how they treated people. We knew how they navigated the workforce. And so that evidence that showed up a long time ago. It just showed up a long time ago. And then for me, like right now, like I don't really have a lot to do. I mean, I've got some small projects, but it's nothing gigantic.
Hmm.
So I'm going to leave in March, and Mike's going to leave um, in December,
Hmm.
and we'll see what's next.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for sharing that because, that is that's a big deal, right? I mean, that was just a part of who you were for a very long time, and that's never going to go away completely, right? It's in your soul. But how you handle that makes a huge difference. And it ties back to you walking your talk, the things that while you're the CEO at McGohan Brabender, and now you have the opportunity to continue to walk that talk, as you transition into this next chapter. So, what does this next chapter look like for you?
I don't know. I think with my wife Lori, I told her me doing nothing doesn't end well for humanity,
Mm-hmm.
for anybody. And if there's something she wants to do, then she followed me for basically, I would say almost a third of my life, and I'll follow her for the last third. So if you want to do something there, then let me know. Outside of ballroom dancing, I'm not really like into that. And then the book, and I love to speak, and I'm being asked to do that a lot, and I really enjoy that. And then I'm kicking up a new project with my son Taylor, and he's on here, and then maybe it's really around my deep passion for mental health and substance abuse.
Mm.
So, and how do you maybe open up people's eyes and minds and hearts and voices to be able to talk about anxiety, depression, substance abuse, financial fear, domestic violence. How do you make that suicide? I mean, those big, huge rocks that
Mhm.
a lot of times people in the workforce just sit in silence. And then, so how do you maybe give permission to people to talk about that and bring life to that in a really beautiful way? And Taylor's a tremendous filmmaker and a storyteller. And I've got some good ideas. And so I'm working with Hyperquake again, Wendy. So Taylor and I are going
Yes.
down
Shout out
October
to
18th.
Hyperquake. Hello.
Yeah. We're going to go down there and see if we can build this model. And, I don't know, actually, so my faith's really important to me. And I know I'm talking a mile a minute, but I kind of ask God, just show me what's next.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't hear anything like physically, like hear, like, what I felt was get quiet and I'll tell you. And
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, I don't think I want to do that right now.
Well,
Does
because
that make sense?
it's not easy, and I think we talked about this last episode, right? Getting
Yeah.
quiet isn't easy, and sometimes we're not quiet because we're afraid of as to what might come up during that time. Well, that's exciting, and it's very important work. That's near and dear to my heart too. And so thank you for at least stepping into it. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of it. But I'm interested in going back to this for now.
Mm.
Book. Culture is an inside job. So maybe I know in the very beginning when we started this podcast, you shared a little bit. We introed a little bit about you working on this book. But now that it's out, maybe take the listeners back to where did it come from? And obviously, it's called Culture is an Inside Job, which is the name of our podcast. And how does it really tie into who you are? Right, it's obviously part of your story, and then also what we're talking about in this podcast. So, where did it come from? And maybe a little bit about that story.
Yeah. I was having breakfast with Mike Mattil probably 3 or 4 times down at, UD, hanging out, just drinking coffee. And he just kind of laughed one day and said, you should write a book. And I'm like, that's impossible. That's just not going to happen. And then it just became to kind of like come alive. And and then so like organizational culture, in my opinion, starts with individual culture. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's so many organizations that, and I'm not picking on Google or, that want ball chairs and ping pong tables and, fun places to work. But, we live in a capitalistic society, and like we still have to produce revenue, we still have to produce results. And we still have to, at the end, profit's not a bad thing. Profit's a good thing. It allows us to do, pay raises and make a difference in our communities and all those beautiful things. But I watched a lot of organizations that they wanted somebody else's culture.
Mm.
Like, hey, I want your culture. You guys have a wonderful culture. And then my dad said years ago, he goes, I didn't even know I had a culture until someone told me I did, which is really noble. In other words, he just did it from his heart, which is
Hmm.
pretty authentic.
Well, and the crazy thing is, everybody's got a culture. It's just a matter of what kind of culture, right?
Yeah,
But luckily,
100%.
your dad was leading from his heart and
Yeah.
had an
And
amazing culture.
and it was so, what he did maybe innately, we had to do intentionally. And then kind of moving through that, and then my own brokenness in my life brought me to a really, really lonely place. Uh, and today, like, I love the bottom. The bottom's a beautiful place as long as you know you're there. So the book's probably a lot like restoring yourself from the inside out.
Hmm.
About maybe going back to that little boy and little girl when you felt like you had a relationship with yourself
Hmm.
where you were comfortable and society didn't tell you you weren't big enough, tall enough, smart enough, pretty enough. Um, and that little boy, little girl is inside of each of us. And we're allowed to go back and meet that little person again
Hmm.
and say, what was it about that person that made you happy, that made you smile? And then when you find that person again, and maybe you put earmuffs on and stop listening to society or other people, find a relationship with yourself, uh, hopefully find a relationship spiritually, find a relationship with yourself physically too, mentally, and then spiritually. And I just think the sky's the limit.
Mm.
I just think everything is just like open. And then massive self-awareness and emotional, all the things that you and Karen talk about all the time. When when you can take those tools, man, you can navigate life in a pretty amazing way.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's
Otherwise, everything looks like a nail, and all you got in your pocket is a hammer, and man, that just ends badly.
right. Right. 'Cause that's what I was just thinking when you were talking is it's that's what all of those things are tools that we get to put in our toolbox and we get to choose which ones that we want to pull out. So the more that we can learn about all of those different types of tools, especially around emotional intelligence, the more opportunity we have to develop and grow. And then, therefore, when we've done that for ourselves, we can do that for other people.
And I think the big thing for me too, in walking through the book, was the fact that like I had a lot of resentment in my life.
Mm.
So I had a bunch of it. And I really felt like I was a really good person. And my humanity was just coming at me. Looking back, I wasn't a really good person. I was just a scared little person with no tools.
Yeah.
And so, like, learning to navigate through conflict, learning how to move through resentment in a healthy way,
Hmm.
maybe even teaching other people to, like, how do you move through those so your life gets freer. You don't wake up in the morning with massive conflict in your heart and your mind. I
Mm.
spent I spent most of my life a pretty angry person, but I masked a pretty, like, optimistic, smiley face.
Hmm.
Uh, and I don't know. It was a lot of fun to write. It was a lot of fun to put together.
Would you? I'm assuming you would call that it's the other side. It's like that other side of the spectrum where you were saying that. Well, really, probably when you were describing earlier, kind of going inside and finding that child and really like who you really are at your core until life tells us that we can't show up in that way, right? Um, but what I know you use the word destructive heroes. And so it sounds like what you're describing, that's who you became was a destructive hero. Is that
Oh yeah.
how true
Yep.
is that?
Yep. And every organization has one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is normally a very high performer,
Mm-hmm.
someone that manages a large part of the revenue. Normally, they're in sales,
Mm-hmm.
or a founder's kid, or a relative of a founder, or a leader. Basically, an untouchable.
Mm. Okay.
And as organizations, what we allow in an organization, we actually encourage.
Mm-hmm.
So that's hard to hear, because here's, I thought self worth equaled performance plus the opinions of others.
Mm. Okay.
So the more I worked, the more stuff I had, houses, cars, boat, like stuff. I was trying to fill this hole in my soul with things that didn't work. And then sadly, your opinion of me meant more than my own opinion of myself. So I was just on a race for affirmation, in a really unhealthy way. And not only that, but I was pretty good at sales too. Um, and sales can be really wonky
Yeah.
because a lot of us think in order to be really good at sales, we have to adapt to different relationships and different people.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we do. But if you're not careful, you'll turn into a chameleon,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll actually make money being a chameleon.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end, you'll lose yourself. You won't even know who in the heck you are. And that's a really sad place to end up.
Right. Scott, um, I know there's a particular story that you have that, like, the moment in time where you're like, okay, this is either going to go one way or another. Do you mind sharing that story with our listeners?
Oh, is that
When,
the Victoria story?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great story. I talked to her the other day too. She's
Oh,
awesome.
she's just amazing. Victoria, if you ever listen to our podcast, I miss you and love you.
Yeah, she's incredible. So 25 years ago, she walked in my office and said, "There's values painted on the wall. You don't exhibit one of them. And I have my own set of values, and you torque them every day. Today's my last day."
That just gave me chills.
Yeah. And then, I let my door, like, who else heard that? So that's all ego, right? Did anybody else hear that?
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked her, I'm like, hey, like, if could we talk about this tomorrow? She said, I'll think about it, maybe. And then she came in the next day. We talked for a while. Obviously, I said, look, I know how to sell, I know how to produce, I know how to, like, do this, but what I don't know how to do is maybe to encourage and inspire and grow people. So if I hired a coach and I gave you access to that coach, would you give me a chance? And we both agreed we'd ask each other three questions every day. Am I okay? Are you okay? Are we okay? And then it started from there. And it just evolved into, taking some courses at Aileron, leaning into UD, entrepreneurship, leadership, reading. I had no faith back then. I found Southbrook right on the heels of that. I thought God was a big cop in the sky handing me a speeding ticket every day, and just judging me. I had no idea he wanted a relationship and be a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really cool journey. It was a lot of work too. Now, I don't want our listeners to think that, like, I had this big bright light on top of me and I had this awakening. I mean, probably 10 years ago, I thought that. But honestly, man, I was just trying to get my butt out of trouble. That's like, so my motive, like in the very beginning, it wasn't virtuous, it wasn't noble. I was in trouble and I was good at getting out of trouble.
Yeah, I love your
But
honesty about that.
in all fairness, it got me to the place where I am today, which is like, and I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but man, our ego, it can do a lot of things, a lot of good things for us. Like, my ego actually brought me to where I am right now, but my ego got me there too. Does that make sense?
Right, right. Yeah, there's two sides to that.
Yeah.
Right. Um,
So
yeah,
Victoria stayed 25 years,
yeah.
and I got to wheel her out to her car on the victory car on her last day of work at MB, which was really cool.
Yeah. She is an amazing human being, that's for sure. Yeah, so because I was just curious too about as you think about because I love your honesty. But we don't know what we don't know. So let's just like you said, okay, so 10 years ago I thought this, but really, well, again, now you're how much further in your life and you've grown and developed even more. But as you think about your progress, like how would you over those years describe the progress that you've seen within yourself? That you've made along the way, right? It just, yes, there was a moment in time that something happened. We've talked about that. That's that learning circle, right? A kairos moment, as we call a moment in time that something major happened, and then you made a decision to do something with it. However, it was a journey. So as you think about the progress that you've really made along the way, how would you how would you just describe that, both from a thought, maybe even from a thoughts and emotions standpoint?
Yeah, I can remember, I can remember walking into a recovery room at Southbrook Church, and I said, "My name's Scott, and my soul is cooked."
Mm,
So, and and I've gone there every Monday night for 15 years. So, in those rooms, I learned a lot about how do I heal from resentment, how do I heal emotionally, spiritually. But then every Monday night, I get to watch myself walk in that room. Somebody that's never been in that room and this is their first time, and I get to watch them kind of either accept it or run from it. Uh, and sometimes I can look at somebody and they're a hot mess, and I can say, "There, by the grace of God, there go I." If I don't keep coming back,
mm,
so I learn so much by living in that world, and I love that world. Um, does that make sense? I think without that, I I honestly think I would give myself way too much credit.
yeah, I mean, I just think that's a part of what you know you need to stay grounded, right?
Yeah, I mean, like
And
all
it's a part
kinds
of
of.
your journey.
Yep. And then I have like some real truth tellers in there too. I mean, and
Mhm,
they're honest, and
mhm.
they'll kick me right in the teeth,
Yeah.
and then I have to repair that, and I have to, you know,
Mhm,
restore that and kind of like move on. But yeah, that's been probably the greatest gift are those rooms on Monday night.
mhm. Yep. It keeps you on the path that you feel that you're called to walk on, that allows you to show up in the way that you truly want to and you're truly called to, right?
Yep.
So I know that we're going to be having more conversations about your book and diving deeper into that. But I think maybe as we wrap up in this particular episode, what do you hope for? What does your heart hope for? Like, what's your why behind writing this book, and what do you hope for others as they read it?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of people just like me.
Mm,
They're out there, and they're trying to fill their life with stuff and things, and could be clothes and car like things, and they're just really tired, and they're super lonely. I wrote a poem once called "Never Alone, Always Lonely,"
mm,
and I and and I think society looks at people that are maybe lost, and they look at them and maybe in some sort of fashion, like um, with their eyes, they'll look at the clothes that they wear or how they look or what they drive and say, well, of course they're not doing well. But there's a lot of people that put on makeup and nice clothes that are just a freaking hot mess. I mean, and I think they're more dangerous than any human being is
Mhm.
the ones that are trying to really fake it. But
Mhm.
what I love about Monday nights is I get to watch I get to watch moms and dads restore their relationships with their kids. I get to watch people that are spiritually and financially bankrupt come alive in life. I get to watch uh, people do beautiful things in serving others. Uh, I get to watch humanity at its very best. And if maybe one of those stories in that book, or maybe one of those chapters, just gives somebody the permission to just say, I don't want to be like this anymore. And I've got some choices to make. And if any of those nuggets can help them, then I can look back and say that would be kind of cool to watch, kind of cool to see. So that's what
Yeah.
I hope for it.
Yeah. I love that. That's beautiful, Scott. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, so it sounds like, this book is just for anyone who wants to and is willing to have that deeper level of self-awareness and really understand that they have a choice in how they show up to give them the opportunity to inspire people in the way they truly want to.
Wow, I appreciate it. Thanks for asking me about it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll dive deeper into this in future episodes. But for now, where can people find your book?
Amazon. So it's on the, I was looking, so I got a call the other day and someone said, it's sold in France and Italy and
Ooh,
Australia. That's kind of cool.
that is
So
so cool.
I'm
Yeah.
speaking today in Virginia, and the guy's like, we have a really good culture, and I'm not really sure we need like, and I'm like, oh no, 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 no. This is more about your people than it is. Oh yeah, we need a lot of that. Like, okay.
Yeah, you got to help decipher the differences.
Yeah. So that's kind of cool. So, but yeah, Amazon.com.
Awesome. Well, it was fun interviewing you today and just finding out more about your journey and your book. And go out and get Scott McGowan's book, Culture is an Inside Job. And with that, we will see you next time. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Wendy. Have a great day.